Hi, I'm Kelly and I'm here with Karyn, and we're here to answer your grief questions. So, if you like our content, make sure you subscribe. That way, you'll be notified of all of our new videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. So, my question for you today is for you, Karyn, and I'm going to read a quote. And I want us to kind of talk about this and your thoughts behind it because it's been something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it's kind of making me change some of my thoughts. So, the quote, which is on my wall right next to me, is grief is the last act of love. We have to give to those we loved. Where there is deep grief, there was great love. So, this quote, do you think it keeps people stuck?
Well, it's interesting. And so, again, this is based on a conversation you and I were having. And I wonder if maybe before I answer that, for context, if you want to share what you were thinking, because it's your quote, you've had it on your wall, and something has shifted for you, it sounds like, in
Mhm.
regards to this quote. So,
Yeah, so I think it's obviously I painted it all. It's a beautiful quote. And I think, yes, we talk about this last act of love, right? It's the last gift, the way we show our love and everything. But what I've been noticing is that some people have a lot of guilt
mm,
for feeling okay, right? We're told it's okay that you're not okay. And then as they move through their grief journey, they start to have moments where they're feeling okay and they feel guilty about that. Maybe that's when they start dating somebody new after their partner died. Maybe it's during the holiday season and you're having moments of joy and you feel okay and then you feel guilty for that. And what I've been noticing in my, I guess, because my mom died when I was 14. So my grief at being 15 years old is a little different than now
yeah.
at 45 years old, now that my dad just died. And I'm really, I think we shouldn't be judging our level of grief on how much we loved somebody.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. And so, I think we have probably both seen people at different times in their grief process, really not even from our perspectives, but from their own, where they're feeling stuck. And there's this sort of progression, not the stages that people talk about, but there are, sort of noticeable steps that do happen along the way. In the beginning, the grief just comes and it just does whatever it's going to do. And it's going to pull you out of, your usual headspace. And it can be incredibly intense and you'll be very tearful and often very distracted, all of those things. And it feels like the grief is just pulling you along and you're just kind of at its mercy. At some point, I believe that starts to shift where there isn't the act of grieving, although the grief still feels like it's there. And then there is that transition where maybe there are some things that start to happen that are okay, or people are feeling a little better, whatever that means, more like themselves. And then that becomes incredibly confusing because also with this, of course, is just this natural passage of time. So our loved ones feeling a little bit further away. And I do believe that that can be a time where people almost try to get the more intense grief back. None of this is like, I think, really purposeful or intentional, but I think that intense sadness, that crying, it feels like a straight line. It's just a direct line between me and my loved one. If I'm in those moments of being very upset and hurting and missing them, they're right here, you know. Um, I
I'm
think with
connected to them.
yeah, it's a connection. Absolutely. And so then without that, if we are starting to feel like we're okay, or we just are, busy and doing other things, I think it can start to feel very unloving. I think it can feel disloyal. I think it could be
Mhm,
scary to send the message to other people that we're okay, while we
mhm.
simultaneously don't want to be the burden and we don't want to be that sad friend. But if I'm not that, then does everybody else move on too? And they think, oh, good, she's okay. And like now
Mhm.
the grief is forgotten, this person's forgotten. So there's a lot of pressure. I always say, there are people who are like the torch bearers. Like they're the ones trying to kind of keep the memory alive, the love alive, and all of that. I think it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on that person to continue to grieve, to stay connected, to honor, their loved one. So, yes, Kelly, I mean, with the quote, it's this idea that that's your act of love is grieving. And if you love the person, you need to be grieving for them. So, what I'll say to people all the time is like, you're going to grieve for the rest of your life. As long as you're here and they're not, you're going to miss them. You're going to wish they were here. That's grief. You're going to love them. That's your grief. But that act of demonstrating it in the ways that we do at different time, I'm not sure that that's necessary. And a goal that I really like to share with people is that I think in terms of what we can do with our grief is that if we can find a way to be grieving with love instead of grieving with pain, that we will be able to find that connection, because that's all we're trying to do. We just want to stay connected. And it can feel very confusing. How do you do that when you're still okay? But there's lots of ways. And finding the love, the memories, all the things that we can do to honor a person is a way to do it, you know.
Well, it's when you're speaking, I was just thinking of a couple other clients even from this week, and one of them was she was told that she looks okay.
Mm,
Some people saw her and said to her spouse, "Oh, she looks like she's doing okay." And she had such an adverse reaction to that and made her feel awful.
mm.
Like,
Yeah,
how can I be okay at this point? Right.
right.
And should I be okay? And what do they mean when they say I look okay?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's such an interesting, it happens, right? People want us to be okay, right? They don't want us to be sad and hurting, right? That's what our loved ones do. They want us to feel okay. And so I think sometimes that comes into play, right? And then there's this like expectation that we have to be this way or we shouldn't be this way because we're forgetting about them if we do. But I really love what you said, right? That we have to grieve with love and not pain. Am
yeah,
I correct?
yeah, yeah,
And I just think that's so like we can still love others, right? And so I always use this as an example. I always say, okay, so say a little girl's mom died, okay? And a stepmom comes into her life. Is she not allowed to love that stepmom?
mm, yeah,
But she also still always loves her mom.
absolutely.
And
And
we
like
our
you've mentioned
hearts
with,
are big enough.
yeah, they are absolutely. And like you mentioned with people with forming a new relationship and the challenges that come with that. I mean, yes, we all, I think, have a lot of love to give. I think that's another quote, that grief is love with no place to go. I mean, sometimes that's what we're trying to do with that. So, yeah, I mean, it's really, it's just very confusing. I think the other part of it too for people is that when something this monumental happens, such a significant loss, it almost feels like the whole world should stop. Like, going through these motions, doing our daily routine, that doesn't even make sense, let alone being okay, But I do find that there is kind of this interesting thing that happens for people that they'll start to report to me like, oh, this and this happened the other day. I came across a picture, or I remembered this story or this memory, and I didn't get upset. I smiled,
Mhm.
I laughed, and it's like, that's getting better. That's that part of the,
Exactly.
you're still mourning the person, you're still grieving, but that's the grieving with love. That's the grieving with gratitude. It's very confusing. It's a hard thing to really kind of work out, I think, in your mind. But I think we have to, as you said, give ourselves permission to be okay. It's it's okay to be okay, as you said
And
before.
then if the next day you look at that same picture and you burst into tears,
Right.
that's okay as well because grief is not linear or predictable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
For
well,
sure.
thank you, Karyn.
Yes.
I'm glad to be able to talk this out because it's definitely
Yeah.
something that's been on my mind lately. So, to sum it up, grief is the last act of love to we have to give to those we loved. Where there is deep grief, there was great love. Thoughts on that and how we can handle that and move forward with our grief.
Yeah. Well, and again, understanding that the intense grief from the early days does feel like the straightest, most direct line and connection to our loved one, and something that we are hesitant to lose is any type of connection. But if we are able to understand that that connection can come in many form and that your suffering is not required to love a person, It's not required. There are other options. You can live a full life and be living it in tribute to them, in honor to them, and stay connected to them. And as we said, making that goal to grieve with love instead of pain, and see if that takes you down a better road that works for everybody. So
Well, I love that. I think this
yeah.
was a great question. I appreciate talking about it.
Yeah.
And thanks for watching. And if you have a grief question, make sure you reach out. We would love to answer it. And make sure to subscribe. And we'll be back with a new questions every Wednesday and Saturday. And take care of yourself.